Hey, everybody, this is the fourth section of Unit 2. We're actually talking about the executive branch now. I'll explain how the president can implement a policy agenda. We're going to be talking about a little bit of the history and the approval ratings, how that affects all of that. So let's get moving. So this is the commander in chef because it sounds like chief. Huh? Anyway, um, the founders knew the country needed leadership. The Articles of Confederation famously did not have a presidency, didn't have an executive branch. So there's a whole lot of things that went along with that. The executive branch actually executes the laws. When you don't have an executive branch, you can't execute the laws that the Articles made. So they had to create a president. What they were worried about was creating another George or King George after they got rid of King George from England. And pretty much the only reason why this was okay was because George Washington accepted that he would become president when they're creating this constitution, and he was pretty much the only person that everyone in the United States agreed on would be okay. He was he was reluctant to get back into politics. So the president, we have a whole bunch of things, a whole lot of mindsets with that. Either belief in a powerful president or they're wary of central power. We don't want that. Like right now, we're going through the COVID crisis, and President Trump just said that his power is absolute. That's a scary thing for Americans to hear. He probably just was speaking off the cuff and didn't actually mean that, but it's still something that we're kind of worried about generally as a population. So, who can become president? Well, you got to be 35 years old. You have to be a natural born citizen. It says born in the United States. That's not necessarily the case. Ted Cruz ran for president. He was born in Canada, but his dad's an American citizen. So he was a naturalized citizen from birth. But you have to be a natural born citizen from birth. If your parents were on vacation in Botswana and they had you, and they're American citizens, you can still run for president. So it's totally okay. Also, if you're an American citizen born in Puerto Rico or Guam or the Virgin Islands, you could still run for president because you're an American citizen from birth. You also live in the United States for 14 years, so you can't be like born in Detroit, then move to Canada for the next 35 years, come back, and then and then run for president. You have to be here for at least 14 years. So prior to President Barack Obama, all the presidents were white males. They were all Protestant, with the exception of JFK. He was Catholic, famously. And the backgrounds of presidents have been very diverse. Wilson was a college professor. Eisenhower was a war hero. LBJ was a school teacher in Texas. So tons of there. We also have a game show host who is now president of the United States. Um, on So how do they get there? So the way you do it typically is you have to win an election, right? You have presidents can serve 4-year terms of office. They can serve two of those, and the 22nd Amendment really put a kibosh on there after FDR did it. So basically, people said that yeah, FDR was a good president. A lot of people said that, not everyone. FDR was a good president, but what if someone who's not good took over? What if we had a bad president? What if we had a Buchanan or a Tyler decide to run for 3 terms? That would not be good. So only 13 presidents have served 2 or more terms. That is out of the 45 presidents we've had. We're in an election year right now, so I'm not sure if Trump will be the 14th president, but we will see. As far as succession is concerned, nearly 1/5 of all presidents became presidents during their term as vice president, which basically means that the president was assassinated. So yeah, they became vice presidents that way, or became president that way. And we actually didn't codify that precedent until the 25th Amendment. So Tyler was the very first president to actually take over. They call him his excellency. He was a jerk. He switched parties. He actually sided with the Civil War, or with the South during the Civil War after he left office. But basically, when William Henry Harrison died, Tyler took over, but they weren't sure what it meant because in the original Constitution just says that we have a vice president in case the president is no longer there in case he dies. So what does that mean? Does he become president? It says he assumes the powers. Does he assume the powers permanently? Do they just have that until they have like a quick election? No one knew. So what he did was he just said, "I'm just taking the oath of office and I'm president." He didn't have a lot of legitimacy. People hated him. He was a bad person. Um, So his last thing he did in office, his last day in office, he threw a huge party and trashed the White House. And he said, now they can't call me a president without a party because he left parties and no one liked him. It wasn't until the 1970s, the 25th Amendment, that we said that officially, when the president dies, a vice president takes over and becomes president. Before that, it was just a norm. So they had to codify it. Um, President chooses both House of Congress to approve the majority vote for the new vice president. And we'll move on because you guys know about impeachment. You've already talked about that. It should be three presidents have been impeached, not two. Moving on. So constitutional powers the president has. He's commander in chief of the Congress. Congress declares war, but he's commander in chief. He controls the military. This idea of Congress declaring war is kind of null and void now. The president pretty much does it. Iraq, Afghanistan, Korea, Vietnam, Panama, Grenada, anywhere, Yemen. We don't declare war anymore. The president just goes to war, and Congress says okay. We give a lot of platitude to the president, a lot of leeway to the president to make these decisions. So we haven't actually declared war since 1943, and that was against Romania. So you know how that worked out. The president also appoints cabinet officials and other officials. He can appoint up to 5,400 people that all around the bureaucracy. He can also veto bills. He calls Congress to special sessions. He can actually adjourn Congress as well, but that's never happened before. He also can grant pardons. He famously gave a pardon um, to Rod Blagojevich, who was the former Illinois governor who went to prison for bribery, and he got pardoned, or no, he got commuted his sentence. So he was able to get out of there. So very interesting. Usually, presidents don't pardon people till the end of their terms because they're usually pretty controversial. He also nominates judges. Currently, Donald Trump, in his third year of office, he has nominated and approved more judges than Obama did in 8 years. There's a whole lot of reasons for that. The expansion of power. So the presidents have been all over the place. They've all been very different, right? However, the one thing that's always been true is that presidents have always expanded power. It's been true with George Washington, Adams, Jefferson, all the way to Trump. Every single one of them expanded the power of the presidency because if you're the president, you don't get like being told no. So that's what happened. So examples would be Jefferson buying Louisiana Purchase or what have you. Okay, moving on. So again, we can move on from all this stuff because I already talked about this. But how does the president gain power? Because we talked about they gain power. How do they do that? Well, the biggest way is crises. Whenever there's a crisis, the president's able to gain power because we say, okay, what's the quickest way to solve this? It's not through months of deliberation with Congress. It's through giving the power to the president or giving power to the president and having him just do it. Other things is the shattering of isolationism. Before World War II, the United States was an isolationist country. We didn't really have a lot of foreign wars. We went to World War One. We fought in Cuba, but that was about it. After World War II, we had to redesign the world, essentially rebuild the world, and we put ourselves in the center of it. So that gives the president a ton more power because he's in charge of foreign policy. The growth of the federal government. Since the 1930s, with the Great Depression, the government has expanded immensely to the point where we have about 5 million people in the bureaucracy. So it grows a lot with entitlement programs and Medicare and Medicaid. And you guys learned in the last video that 60% of the federal budget is through those entitlement programs. Presidents also have an inflated view of their powers. Like I just said, Trump just said that he has absolute power, absolute authority. He does not. But again, that's what a lot of presidents think. So there's some other examples as well. So the Civil War was a time we expanded power. The Cold War is pretty much when the president stopped going to Congress to declare war. 9/11 gave the bureaucracy a whole new level of powers to look into our privacy. The Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security was created thanks to 9/11. So we have all these things. And right now there's a talk about the COVID crisis where the government's going to be able to try to get as much data as possible on all of us so they can help track the spread of this. And this could be a next step in the expansion of presidential power. Strong or weak presidency, like I just talked about it, we want a strong president, but we don't want it to be autocratic. So it's a fine line that we walk. Um, so we'll move on. So we'll move on. That's not as important. We'll keep on going through. This is all just things that we like in our president, but it's pretty much contradictory to each other. Okay, A big aspect of presidencies is approval ratings. Donald Trump talks about his approval rating all the time. He's never gotten over 49%. So that means more than half the country has disapproved of him his entire presidency so far. If he gets us out of this COVID crisis, maybe that jumps up. But he's had a pretty low average approval rating, but he always talks about his approval rating. But as you notice, there's a trend here, okay? You can see that presidents tend to enter the office with a pretty high approval rating, and they tend to leave with a much lower approval rating. Some examples that are a little bit different. George H.W. Bush, he left with a 29% approval rating, but at a certain point, he had like 60%. Barack Obama left with a 60% approval rating. Um, so there's a whole lot of reasons for this. But basically, the reason why is when you come into the presidency, you have a lot of hope. At least, ideally, more than half the people voted for you. You have all these things promised, and then the discourse of reality takes place where you have gridlock in Congress and all that. That's where your approval rating starts going down because you can't live up to those lofty goals that you want. One of the biggest goals that Donald Trump wanted was to build a wall and have Mexico pay for it. We're not really building a wall. Mexico ain't paying for nothing. Sorry for the grammar, but he hasn't lived up to his expectations. We've talked about that, right? Things that go wrong and blame the president, whether it's not. So like the COVID crisis right now is pretty much being blamed on Trump. The entire thing, whether it's justified or not, it is. So this is really hurting his approval rating. It's just dropped in the last 2 months, or in last month, it's dropped about 6 or 7 points to the low 40s. Um, as time goes on, you get tired of the person as well. So the next person tends to look much better. That's another issue. Major events can affect people's presidency. So George H.W. Bush, the reason why he didn't win re-election because there was a mini recession. Vietnam made LBJ not run again. Nixon obviously got taken out by Watergate. Things like that. Scandals are another issue. And the press and the media always criticize the president, whether you think it's fair or not. They always do. That's their job. The press is supposed to criticize the government. The president also has a ton of different jobs, which is just basically different things that he does, and they categorize them into different jobs. We're going to burn through these because we've already talked about a whole lot of them. One of them is not playing golf, but every president pretty much does. The very first one is chief of state or head of state. This is a solely ceremonial job. This is when they're like a spokesperson for the government, for the country, throwing out the first pitch. Obama, right before he left office, or invited the 2016 Cubs, because they're the greatest baseball team of all time, to come by because they won the World Series and one of the top 5 greatest moments of my life. I'm not going to tell you which number that is on there, but it's top 5. The last time I cried, by the way. Just saying. My son was born. Yeah. He's also chief executive, which means he is in charge of executing the law. This means he's in charge of the bureaucracy, which we're going to learn about later on. But the bureaucracy is basically just those government workers that actually carry out the law that Congress makes. So, chief diplomat, he is our number one source of foreign relations. So he makes the deals. Well, he doesn't. He finishes the deals, but he makes what's called executive agreements, which are essentially treaties that the president makes with the heads of other states, and they pretty much have the force of law. They tend to do this because they don't want Congress to make a treaty because it's messy and they could say no. But yeah, he's in charge of foreign relations. Commander-in-Chief, we've talked about that. This has been used a lot to expand the power of the presidency. He is in charge of all the military. He everything from dictating where troops go during Vietnam to the Obama raid. Presidents make those decisions. The Congress tried to limit that with what's called the War Powers Resolution. This is after Nixon said, I'm going to stop the Vietnam War, and he expanded it into Cambodia and Laos to end it, but he did. So they passed that. It's never really been successfully used, because the problem is if they, and we'll talk about it more later, but if they actually censure the president can just veto it. So what are you going to do? Anyway, moving on, we're going to get out of here. So chief legislator, he's also, this is the most important job of the president. He's in charge of vetoing or signing off on laws and bills. His only constitutional capacity for this job is the State of the Union address, where he actually has to go out and say, this is what I'm going to do. He also gives the budget to Congress. We talked about that last section. So he actually creates the budget. Usually it's the Office of Management and Budget does that. but he actually carries it out. If you get a check, like Donald Trump, the administration just sent out stimulus packages for the COVID crisis. It's the Office of Management and Budget, which you can't see the last little part there, but they're the ones that actually sign those checks. Leader of his political party, he is the most visible person in the party, so therefore he is the leader of the party. Especially with Donald Trump, he is it is a cult of personality for him, and you can just see by his static polling approval numbers. He's never gone above 49. He's never gone below 39. It's always within those 10 percentage points, and he's gotten impeached for God's sakes. So he is definitely the leader of the Republican Party. So while they have these different jobs, the presidents don't necessarily carry out these jobs independently from each other. Sometimes you're doing more than just one. If you are signing an executive order, like Donald Trump does, every president does, when he does an executive order, he'll do it in front of the cameras and sign it and show everyone that he signed it. That's him being the head of state and him being the chief executive, or sorry, the lawmaker, chief lawmaker. So you can do multiple things at one time, and oftentimes they work in conjunction with one another. We will talk about this stuff in class, and that's it. So, kiddos, stay tuned for section 2.5, which is talking about the agenda. Have a fantastic day.